Said another way, I encourage a whole food, plant-forward eating pattern. Eat lots and lots of things that are rich in fruits, vegetables, grains, olive oil, beans, nuts, seeds, herbs, and spices. Have that on a daily basis in every meal. Hello, this is Dr. Angela. Welcome to another episode of the Lifestyle MD. This episode is a continuation on my previous recording on cholesterol. Last episode, I talked about what to look for in your cholesterol testing, what to ask for if you weren't already getting it from your doctor. And in this episode, I'm going to give you some advice regarding lifestyle tactics that you can take in order to improve your overall cardiovascular risk, lower your LDL. Now, keep in mind, there are patients who are going to need to be on a cholesterol-lowering medication. I do not subscribe to exclusively avoiding statins and things like that, but I also want to be careful about broadly recommending them to everyone and anyone. It's important that you carefully consider your risk and the benefits of strictly lifestyle-based approaches versus augmenting with medication. This episode does not replace advice from your primary care doctor. It's intended to augment that. So do not take all of your recommendations from here, but I do encourage you to start a conversation with your primary care doctor if you are not already talking about lifestyle strategies that you can take in order to lower your LDL and improve your risk factors. All right, let's get into it. All right, I want to start off with reminding you a few things that we talked about in the last episode that were new or potentially completely novel to some of the listeners, and that is ApoB. What is ApoB and why should you care about it? So research has shown that ApoB may actually be an even better predictor of cardiovascular risk than LDL by itself. By measuring both ApoB and LDL, you can get a much bigger picture, much more specific picture on your overall cardiovascular risk. The job of ApoB is to help transport fat and cholesterol throughout the body. It is predominantly on LDL cholesterol, but it is also on VLDL, chylomicrons, and intermediately low density, or the IDLs as well. So what does that tell you? That it is attached to all of the, quote, bad kinds of cholesterol. If you have elevated LDL, it probably stands to reason that you would also have elevated ApoB. Sometimes those numbers are discordant. You might have a high ApoB and a moderate LDL, which means you should probably be a little bit more concerned about your diet. Regardless of what your LDL and ApoB numbers are showing, I still think that the general strategies toward a healthy lifestyle really apply to all. It really comes down to how aggressive you want to be. So what can you do to lower your ApoB, to lower your LDL and lower your triglycerides, because that's part of the factor. Triglycerides is what these molecules are carrying around. First thing, the most obvious strategy for lowering your cardiovascular risk by way of lowering your ApoB, LDL, triglycerides is by adopting a healthy dietary pattern. But what is a healthy dietary eating pattern? There is a lot of mixed information out there about what a healthy dietary pattern is. I will tell you one common thing, universal across all, quote, diets that you see, is that they are encouraging no added sugar and no processed foods. So hard stop. Cut out the processed foods and cut out added sugar. You need to be more aggressive, the worse off your numbers are. Consistent dietary approach that has been shown to be beneficial is the overall Mediterranean diet. The Mediterranean diet is going to be rich in fruits and vegetables, grains, olive oil, beans, nuts, seeds, herbs and spices, fish and seafood, and yes, even wine. You can have poultry, eggs, and dairy products, but only moderately. You're going to be having those other ingredients on a daily basis, and you're going to be having things like fish and seafood and wine a couple times a week, and then things like poultry and eggs and dairy products about once a week. This is what we have seen in a Mediterranean diet. And then you can have red meat and sweets even more rarely. Why does this matter? Folks who live in regions that adopt a predominantly Mediterranean diet have much lower risk of cardiovascular disease. They have better cognitive performance later in life, overall great longevity, and health span. This Mediterranean diet is something that's pretty common in what we know as the blue zones. We can talk more about the blue zones in another episode, but this Mediterranean diet overall is probably my favorite recommendation because it really doesn't necessarily exclude any particular foods or categories. It just kind of gives you a relative proportion of where you should emphasize. Said another way, I encourage a whole food, plant-forward eating pattern. Eat lots and lots of things that are rich in fruits, vegetables, grains, olive oil, beans, nuts, seeds, herbs, and spices. Have that on a daily basis in every meal. And then have some of those other things spread out more sparingly. You may not like that. There's a carnivore approach to eating. There's keto, all that kind of stuff. I'm not saying that there's not a place for that. And there may be people who that may work for, but I would say generally speaking, more broadly speaking, I feel like most people can't go wrong with this kind of diet. It's really just panned out for centuries in large populations of people, and we see it benefiting folks on a daily basis. And if nothing else, just cut out sugar and processed foods and stick to whole foods. That's going to make a world of difference. If we really want to get into even more nitty-gritty detail, you really need to keep saturated fat out of your diet. And saturated fat is in processed foods, added sugar, refined grains. Keeping that out of your diet, regardless of whatever dietary pattern you adopt, is essential to lower your triglycerides and your LDL. Added sugar. Sugar is a significant culprit when it comes to cholesterol. Sugar encourages the liver to produce more cholesterol. So don't eat it. I mean, I know that sounds hard, but really, if you cut out your diet long enough, you're not going to miss it and you're going to not really crave it quite as much. Now that you've made this dietary modification, do you need to keep watching your ApoB? Yes. You should be checking your ApoB, your triglyceride, your LDL on a regular basis, something like every 6 months to 12 months, depending on how high it was to begin with. Seeing that you've improved your ApoB level, your LDL level, and your triglycerides by adopting some simple lifestyle changes can be really encouraging. And so that's why checking it, not just because you want to make sure that you hit that mark, but because you want to have a reward. You want to have that feedback that what you're doing is actually making a difference. So how do you implement this kind of lifestyle change? When I'm talking to patients in my office, I don't try to get them to change everything all at once. So if you're one of those individuals who are hearing me say this and go, okay, how am I going to change everything in my whole diet? Not only do I not want to give up a lot of these other foods in my diet, I may not know how to make foods. I may not know how to cook that way. I don't necessarily know if I can afford that. Well, let's kind of debunk a few different myths. First of all, eating a predominantly Mediterranean diet would actually be more cost effective. Because guess what? Beans actually don't cost a lot. Yeah, you might fart a little bit more, but that's why your stomach and your gut is getting used to having all that wonderful fiber. Fresh produce and fresh fruits may be harder to come by depending on the season. It may be more expensive. But you know what? Canned and frozen is not the worst thing. If you're making the choice between having lots of processed foods versus canned fruits and vegetables without sugar added, of course, or frozen fruits and vegetables, I'd much rather someone be making the choice to eat frozen fruits and vegetables over processed foods. So instead of asking the question, is this good for me? How about, is this better than the alternative? If I'm going to eat this, what is it replacing? So one strategy you could take is by replacing a food group or food item. Introducing one new meal per week, adding one new food item that you haven't normally had into your dietary pattern a week at a time. I had a patient recently who I gave her a few things to choose from, and she picked beans. She said she wanted to add beans because she doesn't usually eat a lot of beans. I said, well, there's a lot of beans to choose from. You can do canned beans or dry beans, whichever you prefer, black beans, pinto beans, lima beans, navy beans. Which one do you want to do? So she picked one of those, and I said, now you just have to find a way to incorporate that into your diet. Let's just try a few times this week. Pick out some new recipes. You can Google. Google is your friend. There are so many different ways to incorporate new foods into your diet, and it doesn't have to be overwhelming. But what is overwhelming if you try to do it all at once? I'm not interested in encouraging people to do like a quick diet that they're going to overhaul everything overnight and then not keep up with it, because anyone can do something dramatic for a short amount of time, but it's hard to maintain that momentum indefinitely. I want you to incrementally incorporate these changes to the point where it feels seamless and becomes habitual because you're just incorporating it into your daily routine and your weekly routine. So what's the key takeaway there? Make incremental changes. Swap out foods, choose healthy options that are still affordable, and maybe introduce one new food item or food group a week or every 2 weeks, whatever works for you. If you're having a hard time making those choices, you want to talk with a specialist. I encourage you to meet with a nutritionist or a health coach who can help you navigate that. If that's not an option, there's tons of resources online. I'll make sure to include some of those at the end of this podcast. Now, there may be some other factors that are contributing to an elevated cardiovascular risk or elevated ApoB levels, and LDL levels, and triglycerides that are not directly or not exclusively related to your diet. High coffee consumption has actually been shown to be associated with increased ApoB levels, but I'm not going to encourage you to cut out coffee because black coffee especially, is good. So I'm wondering if that coffee relation is people consuming coffee with added sugar and coffee with creamer. So black coffee, good. Coffee with all other stuff, not so good. Insulin resistance. Having a high fasting insulin level is also indicative of risk for elevated ApoB? Well, that's associated with having a diet rich in refined carbohydrates and high in sugar. Kind of taking care of that a little bit. But what about hypothyroidism? If you have hypothyroidism, you're at risk of having poor regulation of your cholesterol. So if you have not had your thyroid checked and you've done all these other strategies with your diet, you feel like you're hitting the mark in everything, make sure you have your thyroid level checked, especially if it runs in your family. But even if it doesn't, if you haven't had it checked and you're concerned that you might be missing something, get your thyroid level evaluated. Weight. Being overweight or obese can definitely affect your ApoB levels, but it kind of is not just in of itself. Being overweight or obese is a symptom of something else going on. So I don't like to focus on that as a primary culprit. If someone's struggling with being overweight, I like to figure out why. So is it diet? Is it hormonal? What's the cause? Are they not getting enough sleep? So this brings me to the next set of issues, menopause. Unfortunately, ladies, when we hit perimenopause, menopause, that decline in our estrogen levels and the fluctuating hormone levels are actually going to lead to elevated risk of cardiovascular disease. That's why women are more likely to suffer heart attacks and heart disease later in life, because that protective effect of our estrogen is gone. We are losing estrogen. And so drops in estrogen is going to lead to higher chances or higher elevations in ApoB and a disruption in your cholesterol metabolism. So I'm not saying that everyone needs to run out and get hormone replacement therapy, but that could be a factor. The hormone changes in menopause, and some women are going to be at more risk than others, but that could be triggering the cholesterol problems that you're experiencing. And the final thing that I'm going to talk about in this category of lifestyle you need to make sure you're checking on is sleep. If you're sleeping less than 6 hours a night, you are likely going to have increased levels of ApoB. So if you're chronically sleep deprived, you're going to have it's basically chronic stress. And that chronic stress on your body, which is going to put you in a heightened state of like, I need to be awake, I need to be functioning. Your body is going to be putting out these higher level of cortisol and stress hormones. And you may not be measuring this on blood work. It's not going to necessarily show up, but you are in a chronic higher state of stress, and your body is showing it by producing, retaining fat, by having higher insulin levels, by making it difficult for you to lose weight, and by causing you to have disruption in your metabolism and regulation of cholesterol. So get sleep. If you were not getting 7 to 8 hours of sleep on a regular basis, then that might be what you need to focus on, is figuring out how to modify things in your lifestyle to allow for that. So simple strategies, if you want to kind of keep it real basic and you're someone who just wants like a step-by-step approach to lower your cholesterol, taken from Dr. Angela's strategy, I would say number 1, follow a predominantly Mediterranean diet. So something that is whole food, plant predominant eating pattern. You're going to be consuming most of your fats in the forms of olive oil and nuts and seeds, and you're going to be limiting your fructose intake. So that's going to be processed foods, added sugar, high fructose corn syrup. You're going to also consider things like supplements. So berberine, vitamin C, probiotics, red yeast rice, these can all be reasonable things to add. But before you add any supplement to your regimen, make sure you talk to your primary care doctor, because some of these supplements can interact with medications and may cause adverse events. So don't take a supplement without talking to your doctor. The final category of things that I'm going to talk about is exercise. So studies have shown that exercise is associated with reduced risk of cardiovascular disease. And one of the ways it does that is that it increases the high density lipoprotein, which, if you recall from the previous episode, I referred to this as the good guy, the cholesterol that goes around like a garbage truck, collecting all those triglycerides and taking it out of your body, taking it out of the deposited blood vessels. High levels of HDL has lots of healthy benefits, and people with high HDL levels tend to fare better when it comes to cardiovascular risk. Another thing is that not only improved HDL levels, but improves your lipoprotein profile. You can engage in moderate intensity or high intensity. Either one of those is going to be a necessary factor. Some other studies have shown that resistance training is a very important factor when it comes to controlling your cardiovascular risk and improving your HDL levels and lowering your LDL levels. But how much do you need to do? Well, I'll tell you that there's still a little bit of debate out there about this, but general guidelines and recommendations will say 30 minutes 5 days a week of moderate intensity exercise, or 20 minutes 5 days a week of high intensity exercise. I usually discourage people from doing strictly high intensity exercise, especially if you're a woman in her mid 40s and later. Doing resistance training or mixing into that a combination of resistance training. All right, so there is clearly a direct relationship between elevated cholesterol levels and coronary artery disease. And there's also a direct relationship between lowering your cholesterol levels and improving your cardiovascular risk when you engage in regular exercise. The quantity and the type of exercise and all of that is still up for debate, but there seems to be the most compelling evidence around engaging in 30 minutes, 5 days a week of moderate intensity exercise, or 20 minutes, 5 days a week, high intensity exercise. If you combine moderate intensity with low intensity exercise, you can do 3 days a week, 2 days a week of each, whichever. If you're someone who's not exercising at all, the answer is something is better than nothing. If you're not doing any exercise, just doing something like as little as 30 minutes a day is going to make a difference. And that 30 minutes doesn't necessarily have to be all at once. Another thing to consider is exercise does not have to be sandwiched into a gym or an activity you do in your garage or a run. Just moving and being more physically active on a regular basis is also an important factor. While a lot of times we talk about doing exercise in dedicated chunks, I want to also encourage people to think about being sedentary versus non-sedentary and exercise versus not exercising. First, if you're pretty sedentary, find ways to be less sedentary. Get up and walk more throughout the day. Once you've addressed the sedentariness, then think about how you can increase your exercise on a regular basis. You really need to be attacking both of those, because if you're exercising but sedentary most of the day, you're really eating away at your cardiovascular benefits by sitting all day long. So the real answer is this: increase your physical activity as much as feasibly possible and make sure you're incorporating resistance training programs. You can do that through circuit training. You can do running, anaerobic stuff, but no matter what, if you're starting from zero, just building in and gradually building up and is doing as much as tolerable is the real solution. And if you're not sure where to begin and you need some instruction, I recommend working with a trainer or, again, a health coach. If that is not something that's available to you, I'll include some resources at the end of this podcast to help you get started. All right, that's it. That was kind of a quick episode. I really just wanted to hit on some high points, encouraging you to make some dietary changes, work on making sure you're getting adequate sleep. Anything less than 7 to 8 hours a night is likely going to be having negative effects on your overall cholesterol, in addition to every other aspect of your health. Making sure that you are exercising and moving. So not just exercising and getting that, quote unquote, 150 minutes a week of moderate intensity exercise, but that you're also not sedentary throughout the day. Get up and move, walk, take walking breaks, stand up, do more than just exercise in those discrete blocks of time, because that's not sufficient. And finally, if you have not had this conversation with your doctor, please have a conversation with the doctor. If you have made all of these lifestyle changes and taken everything I've said into consideration and things for your doctor has recommended, and your numbers are still not budging, then you might want to consider taking a medication to lower your cholesterol, because at the end of the day, it's all about improving your health and well-being, and having to take a medication is not a sign of failure. So I want everyone to just make sure that you are pausing, taking a breath. Remember, the advice given here is for informational purposes only. Please talk to your doctor before embarking on any plan or exercise plan or making any major dietary changes, and certainly before adding any supplements to your diet, to make sure that you're not causing yourself any harm. And if you're my patient already, then I got you. So hope that you are all doing well and have a wonderful, wonderful day. I'm looking forward to coming back with some more podcast episodes with my new learnings from the Lifestyle Medicine Conference, which was fantastic. Can't wait to share with all of you some of my key takeaways, and I hope that everyone has a good day. All right, thanks for joining. Bye. This has been another episode of The Lifestyle MD. Special thank you to Lou Musa for the show theme music, created with Bree Photography and makeup by Janae for the cover photo. And if you enjoyed this podcast and you haven't already, please subscribe today and share with another woman doctor who may benefit. You may also follow me on Instagram at Angela Lifestyle MD. I am Dr. Angela. Thank you for joining me today.